Okay. Welcome to the first presentation in this on today. Getting started with digital accessibility. We'll be covering some basic accessibility fundamentals. Today, I'm so excited to be with you today. Thank you so much for being with us as well. A little bit about me. I am the assistive technology here at UNC Charlotte. I've been there since November 2012. I came from IT background where I was an assistive, where I was a senior IT specialist in one of the American university in the Arabian Gulf. Prior to that, I worked for pre-press houses and press houses where I learned many of the graphic and desktop publishing. I'm mentioning that because when I came as an assistive technology, that completed the circle. So I came from IT background. I know many of the desktop publishing software and graphic, and now I understand how to make them accessible. And that was really great for me. I hold a bachelor degree in computer science, a master degree in engineering systems management with IT concentration. And here from UNC Charlotte, I did a graduate certificate in instruction technology. Let's get into the objective. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to name some of the few laws that supports people with disabilities and supports equal access. We'll provide you some of the terminologies, so you will be able to define these terminologies and understand the difference between them, especially accessibility versus accommodation. And we'll talk about universal design as well. You'll be able to define what is disability, who has a disability, what type of disability, and how people with disability perceive information. You will be able also to provide or make some of your content accessible, because we'll give you a quick hints and tips. Just keep in mind that this is our first presentation. There is coming more presentation that will get into detail on many of the topics that I'll be covering today. So some background in legal requirements. There are actually many of them, and they all focus around one purpose or one goal, is to prohibit organizations and federal funded institutions from discrimination in disability basis. We already talked about Section 504. We have Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it is refresh of the 2017, and we'll talk about this one with some details. We have also the American with Disability Act of 1990, and it is Amendment Act of 2008. Even in the level of North Carolina, there's North Carolina General Status Chapter 168A, Persons with Disability Act. And again, they focus in prohibiting discrimination against people with disabilities and making discriminating against them, or making just life difficult because of their disability, or rejecting their applications because of their disability. As long as they qualify for a position or for education, they should get equal access just like any other person, regardless of their abilities. So what is Section 508? And notice here in this slide, I titled it as standard. Yes, because Section 508 talks about some detail that makes your content accessible. So in 1998, Congress amended the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And it simply requires federal agencies and institutions federally funded to make their electronic and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. But that was in 1998. At that time, internet was not as advanced as these days, probably was not even available to everyone. There was no cell phone, there was no tablets, computers were very few of them. So all of this technology advanced, and with that, there was a need for an update. And that happened actually in 2017. So Section 508 was updated. Sometimes they call it Section 508 refresh. And it became a law in January 18th of 2018. And simply, of course, there's a long list. There's even a reference that I gave here. But simply, it harmonized or adopted WCAG version 2 level A and level AA. Oh, WCAG, what is WCAG? WCAG, let's talk about that for a moment. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guideline. So it is WCAG, sometimes pronounced as WCAG. And it covers a wide range of recommendations for making web content accessibility. This is their terminology, but it is not only web content. So their recommendation covers any electronic content, including Microsoft Word files, Google document file, a course in a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard, an app that you develop for your cell phone to publish or something like that. So the recommendation covers any electronic content. It is good to know that WCAG was developed by Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI WAY, and World Wide Web Consortium. Now, those people are the people who wrote the HTML coding that made the website. So it makes sense that they wrote the guideline for WCAG or for accessibility. And there will be actually a presentation that focuses on this topic. So I'll just stop by that. I'll just keep in mind that WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guideline. 2 is the version number, all right? There are conformance levels, A, AA, and AAA. Legally, as per Section 508, we are required to meet WCAG 2.0, A, and AA, and it is good to go for a higher version, like 2.1 or AAA. It just means that you are more accessible, which is recommended, of course. Yeah, so let's get into the next topic. So what is a disability? An individual with disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limit one or more major life activities, or has a record of such impairment, or regarded as having such an impairment. And this is a legal definition that normally counselors follow when identifying people with disability and accepting their applications. You keep in mind always that in a campus, there's about 11% of the students who has a disability. In another word, if you have a class with 100 students, approximately 11 of them has a disability. Now, most of these students, about 80% or more, have a hidden disability. And what do we mean by hidden, sometimes called invisible disability? It is a disability that is not obvious. So you don't see the student with a cane. So if they are using the cane, probably they are blind or low vision. You don't see a student with a wheelchair. Okay, they just walk like other students, and though they have a disability. Normally, this is related to mental or neurological nature, such as ADHD, or anxiety disorder, or brain injuries, and so forth. Let's get into this, the next slide. Normally, people with disability use assistive technology to overcome their disabilities and be able to access information or even any main of their life. So assistive technology is a device or any item or a piece of equipment or a product system, whether acquired commercially, off the shelf, or modified or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. That could be ranked as a high technology or low technology. A high technology, like, for example, a computer or a software in the computer, or even the cell phone, could be considered as an assistive technology. Sometimes a very advanced wheelchair that is computerized is a high technology. And sometimes it is a low technology, like a piece of metal or piece of device, like the cane that is used by most blind people. It's considered as an assistive technology. So it could be a hardware or it could be a software. As long as it helps overcome and remove the barriers, it is considered an assistive technology. There are many examples like the wheelchair, a computer, a tablet, a cell phone, the screen reader. Screen reader is a software that is used mostly by people who are blind. It will read everything on the screen, including the menu. All right. It normally consists of shortcuts, and the more the student or the user the user who uses a screen reader knows about the shortcuts, the more they can control and manipulate the computer. There is also text-to-speech. That is where mostly you have to select the text and it will read aloud for you. The cane, that is used mostly by blind or low vision. Magnifying tools like CCTVs and like handheld CCTVs and so forth. So these are some of the examples in about assistive technology. So let's talk about some of the people who have disability and how they perceive information. So we'll start here with blind people. A blind person is a person who is unable to see. Normally, they are characterized by using a cane or service dog. When they use the computer, they rely on the keyboard because they rely on touching and hearing. So they want to touch the keyboard and be able to use the shortcuts that is available and provided by the software or the operating system. Also, they use, as I mentioned, screen reader such as JAWS and the VoiceOver. JAWS normally works with Windows. There is also a built-in that is called Narrator. VoiceOver normally used by Apple users and iPhones. How to prepare for them so they can perceive information better. The first thing, and it's really very important, I should maybe highlight it, typed text. You'll see that typed text in almost every coming slides. What is a typed text? Is a text that you can select or highlight. Okay, sometimes you can copy and paste or modify. All right. The opposite would be an image. For example, we had a question in the previous presentation about PDF, scanned PDF. Well, that scanned PDF is actually an image. You see a text, but you cannot select any specific word in that text. So it is an image, and that's why screen reader will not be able to read it, will not be able to convey the information that is included in the image. Unlike a typed text. So if the text is typed, then the screen reader will be able to convey the information and it will be read. It is very important to maintain a proper document structure. Mostly that is happening when you specify the header. Okay, I'm talking here about the outline of your document. For example, if I am writing about United States of America, that would be heading level 1, like the main title. Then probably I'll talk about each state. So North Carolina would be heading level 2, a subheading of heading level 1. If I talk about population of North Carolina, schools, economy, that each one of those is actually heading level 3 under heading level 2. So you are talking about an outline and a hierarchical structure that should be maintained in proper way. So you don't select your headings based on how they look like. You select your heading based on the level of the hierarchy in your structure. Now, why is that important? As the user, especially blind, are interacting with your document, they are building that structure in their mind. And if it is proper, they have now a better understanding of your documentation and your courses. So it's important to maintain this structure. Normally, this is done through styles. I'm sure there will be more presentation coming on that will talk in detail about those. Also, if you are presenting using a picture, you should add an alternative text. Alternative text is just a description of what you want to, why did you use that image? There must be a goal that, or a reason where you selected that image and you are presented that image. Normally, people who are sighted will see it and understand it. So you want to provide an alternative for a blind. So it is manuals. You have to add it manually to each image you are using, unless of course if it is decorative, then maybe you want to skip that image by selecting decorative. Normally most of the desktop publishing software and even learning management systems includes this option where you can select that this image is decorative, so the screen reader will skip it. If you are presenting your data using tables, you should specify the header row and header column. You know, in table consists of cells. Okay, visually, when I see one of the cells, I understand what it means. All right. Well, you wanna provide the same advantage for someone who's blind by specifying the header row and header column. We'll move on to talk about people who have low vision. So low vision is a condition in which a person vision cannot be fully corrected by glasses. Normally, they're characterized by using magnification glasses or closed circuit television. The shortcut is CCTV. It comes in many different forms. Sometimes it is called desktop magnification system or just a camera magnification. Cell phones these days comes with a built-in magnification. So it is now an assistive technology. If they are using a computer, they normally use a magnification software. Sometimes it comes as a built-in, like in Windows and in Mac. There's also third party like Zoom Text where you can zoom in and to read aloud as well. How to prepare for them? You see, I'm repeating use type text, one of the important key for accessibility. You have to select a clear and visible fonts, a font that can be visually readable. We normally recommend using sans serif family font, such as Helvetica, Verdana, Futura, and so forth. Of course, the larger the font, the better. We normally ask that you maintain 12 points or 14. And again, it depends really on the font you select. Some fonts are larger, so you want to minimize the font size. Some fonts are already small, like Arial, then you should maintain about 12 points. If you are using colors, you should maintain high contrast colors. Okay, so the foreground color of the text should have a high contrast with the background, so it is visible and clear. And I'm repeating the same requirements of a blind, like using a proper document structure, proper heading levels, using alt text with pictures, and specifying header and row columns, row and header columns for your tables. I'll move on and talk about hearing. So there are two types of hearing. Some people have hard of hearing, some people are deaf or deafness. Hard of hearing is a reduced ability to perceive sound, and deafness is the inability to hear. Normally characterized by the inability to hear classroom lectures while they are in the lecture, and sometimes they will need support. Like for example, you'll see them sometimes wearing the FM system, which is a frequency modular system. In this case, you will have to use a microphone to make sure that the voice will reach them. Sometimes they are accompanied with sign language interpreter who will interpret all the talk. Sometimes they are accompanied with a CART specialist. A CART stands for Communication Access in Real-Time Translation, sometimes called real-time captioning. You know, sometimes you see that, especially in football games and national games, with a very large black screen, and you see the text popping up. Actually, there's one behind this using a Sonotype machine, where they type like a typing machine. They type everything that the anchor is talking about, and it pops up and show. And there's also a smaller version where it can be used in classrooms. We had a conference a few years ago where we had to hire an online CART provider, and they just need to listen to the speaker and type, and the spoken word were coming on the computer as the person was attending. Now, how to prepare for them? As I mentioned, if you are lecturing, you should use a microphone. You should always face the students so they can see the impression of your face as you talk. If you are presenting using a video, make sure that it is captioned. And if you are providing an audio file, it should be associated with a transcript. Okay, I'll move on to the next, physical disability. So an example of that would be a brain injury or spinal cord injury. There are many of them. And it is actually any physiological disorder affecting one or more of the body system. Normally, they are characterized by the variety of gross and fine motor limitation or fatigue. Again, I'm using type text. Okay, why is that? Because it is easier to read. It is easier to select, zoom in. It will remain sharp. It is easier using assistive technology, which I'll talk about in a moment, it is easier to select, paste, and copy, and so forth. Normally, these users, because probably they have limited use of their hand, will use a dictation software. A dictation software, an example of that is Dragon Natural Speaking. Most of the operating system also comes with built-in dictation software, so it could be used as well. If they have limited use of their hand, they will use a smart nav or hands-free mouse, such as smart nav or quad jaw. Smart nav is a device that relies on the movement of the head. So the student or the user will wear a reflective dot, okay, sometimes in glasses or a hat. And there's a camera that sits on the screen. And through that camera, they control the mouse. They can double click, copy, paste, drag items, and maneuver the computer. We have a student who came in and he's paralyzed, neck down. He started a few years and he's now doing his PhD in mechanical engineering. I'm really excited for him. He's a great student and he's doing a great job only using SmartNav. This is really great. A quad joy is another device that can also be used, and it relies on sip and puff through breathing, and it does the same. They can select the items and double click and do many movements and manipulate the computer. Okay, I'll move on with the next type of disability here related to cognitive and mental. So that would be a development delay or mental impairment, and it is variety of medical conditions affecting cognitive abilities. An example of that would be learning disability, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, memory loss, language problems, sometimes comprehension with math and visual presentations. How to help them, or sometimes they normally use text-to-speech software most of the time because it is easier to comprehend for them. An example of read and write or text-to-speech software is read and write software. There's also many other software that convert text-to-speech or do text-to-speech. Sometimes it comes built in, like in Microsoft Office. And sometimes it is just a plug-in that you have to download, for example, to Chrome, and will read aloud for you. Normally, students need extended time in their exam, and this kind of accommodation, which we'll talk about that in a moment, or taking a test in a quiet area where it is less distraction, and so forth.
Khalil, we actually have a question that popped up, if you don't mind me pausing you for a moment and asking. Somebody was asking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and the fact that they're guidelines, and asked, are these mandatory or enforceable, and what are some of the challenges in enforcing these guidelines? Could you speak a little bit about that complex question?
Yeah, so based on Section 508, yes, it is mandatory to meet WCAG version 2A and AA. All right. So, and it consists of multiple recommendations and guidelines. For example, making text color as contrast high, the contrast of the text to be high, like if there's a colors, or selecting a font that is readable, avoiding like decorative fonts. So yes, it is mandatory. And normally we check websites and content based on WCAG to WCAG version 2 AA. Just to let you know, we say AA because normally it covers A. So when you meet AA, you are actually covering A. Okay, and it is level of performance. I highly recommend that you attend the workshop today that is coming. I guess I'm not sure what time, but it's going to go in detail in those. I was planning to do that, but again, we do not want to conflict or repeat the information in presentations that are today. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Khalil. The presentation on web accessibility and the WCAG standards is at 3 o'clock today.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So let's talk about accommodation. All right. So Accommodation is a specialized, customized modification or adjustment to a job, work, or educational environment to allow a person with a disability to perform tasks or gain education without the interference of their disability. Now, in this definition, I made specialized and customized bold. The reason because this is the key. It is specific for a person. So someone with a disability meets a counselor, provide a proof of their disability, and they request or discuss accommodations. These accommodations are specialized for that person. In another word, if I have, let's say, 6 people with ADHD, probably each one of them will require a different accommodation. It depends on how their ADHD is impacting their education life and their attending the classes or taking exams. So some of them probably will need extended time, just 50% of the original time. Some of them will need 100% of the original time. Some of them will need text-to-speech software. Some of them will need just an early documentation or early access to the documentation, like the slides and whatever the instructor provides. So there are many examples of accommodation. We normally associate the word reasonable, and the only one that judges that it is reasonable is a qualified counselor. So extended time is an example. Just to give you the idea, you don't give all your students extended time, but that person, that student who provided you with something called letter of accommodation, that specifies that this student needs extended time in their exams, only that student will take extended time. So that is an accommodation for that specific user. Another example, Braille printing. Not all blind users know Brailling. Some of them, most of them actually, especially older ones, but these days they rely on audio files with technology. So who knows that? It is the counselor. When the student meets with the counselor, they request the accommodation and they specify the accommodation. Sometimes a special, like specific assistive technology. We mentioned SmartNav versus QuadJoy. And the reason I mentioned that because it is normally used with people who have limited use of their hand, probably paralyzed neck down. But again, someone who has a stronger neck will be able to use SmartNav. Another person will prefer QuadJoy. So who approves that and how it is given? It is actually a process. So the student with disability has to meet with a counselor, sometimes under the umbrella of Office of Disability Services, like what we have in UNC Charlotte. Sometimes it has a different naming, but it doesn't matter. There's a counselor who will accept these papers or the documentation, meet with the student with disability, discuss the accommodation, and provide letter of accommodation. Now I'll talk about accessibility so you understand the differences. Accessibility is the practice of designing and developing websites and applications such that their presentation, content, and functionalities are understandable and operable by as many people as possible. Again, in this definition, I made designing and developing bold and large because this starts from the designing phase. Notice that in this definition, we did not mention disability. It is for everybody, all right? So it is not specific for a specific person. It is for everyone. It will benefit you sometimes as an author. It will benefit all of your participants regardless of their abilities. When you provide access to your documentation, you are actually providing equal access. There is no need for the student to ask for specific font or font size or color contrast. Every user will be able to access your information. An example of accessibility would be the ramp. And that is very important example because you see architects, when they start designing a building, they don't ask how many people with disability will access that building. They will immediately, from beginning, from the scratch, keep in mind ramps, elevators, all of the accessibility requirements without question. And that is accessibility. Of course, providing a clear and readable font and font size is also part of accessibility. Maintaining a high contrast is part of accessibility, and so forth. Again, this is another slide to just focus and make sure that you understand the differences between accommodation and accessibility. Always when it comes as best practice, accessibility comes first. All right. You don't have to have a people with disability to make your document accessible. It has to be accessible from beginning. Then comes accommodation. Accessibility is the responsibility of everyone. You should educate yourself on all of the tools and hints and tips that make your document and electronic courses accessibility. While accommodation is a process, as I mentioned. All right. Instructors are not supposed to provide accommodations without the letter of accommodation. So what happens? The student meet with the counselor, receive the letter of accommodation, presented to the instructor. The letter of accommodation has a list of accommodation that the student qualify for. And you just work within that accommodations. So if the students approach you saying, okay, I have a disability, I want extended time, the obvious answer, where's your letter of accommodation? If the student doesn't have it, please go meet your counselor or go to the Office of Disability Services, register, meet a counselor, and provide me with letter of accommodation, and I'll provide all the accommodation you want. Also, you do not, if the student bring that letter and it has a list of accommodation, and normally these accommodations, for example, extended time, and has some explanation, definition, what's that accommodation? For example, some students with diabetic will have to eat during the class. So they have the snacks or during the exam. So we cannot just disallow them because now this is their health. And it is an accommodation. So you don't ask the student, why is that accommodation? What type of disability do you have? That is against FERPA. FERPA is the Family Educational Right and Privacy Act. It's a confidential information. You don't ask the student about their disability, but it's okay to ask how best can we provide the accommodation. It is also recommended that you contact the counselor to ask about this accommodation if you have a question about them. So I hope this is clear because it is confusing sometimes. We had issues where, for example, a student needed a classroom class notes because they cannot take notes because of their disability. They cannot take notes for themselves. So what the instructor went and publicly said, okay, your colleague John Doe needs class notes. Who volunteers to help? That is prohibited. That is not good. That's against the law. That is against the confidential information. So I'll move on with the next slides. Now, talking about accessibility and accommodation and all of these hints and tips and assistive technology, this drives us to universal design. Universal design is a terminology that first written by Ron Mace, who was an architect in NC State, and he was a wheelchair user. And it says universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adoption or specialized design. So normally when we provide universal design workshops or accessibility workshops, we ask the participant, if you have a question, how is that universal design? Go ahead and ask it. I will show you that it is beneficial for you as an author, as you are creating your course or creating your document or thesis, and it is going to benefit your recipients regardless of their ability. And that concludes our workshop today or our presentation. I will just mention some of the highlights about these fundamentals. Always when you create a document, make sure you check it for its accessibility. It is good to know about all of the accessibility hints from beginning, okay? But even, I mean, we are specialized in accessibility. When we create a document, we run accessibility checker to make sure that it covers everything because we miss things sometimes. So the accessibility checker is a very useful tool. It is normally available in most modern desktop publishing software. When you run it, it will tell you about the error, the issue that is in your document, why it is wrong, who it will impact, and how to fix. So it is a very great source of education. Make sure you always use universal design principles, and it is the approach for accessibility. Always follow accessible methods when designing courses, creating documents or presentations. Always use the ready-made format. This is how you structure your document. Ready-made format comes with most modern desktop publishing. For example, in Microsoft Word, it is called the styles, and it is at the top. It has heading level 1, heading level 2. When you click on it, heading level 3 will pop up. And these headings can be modified to meet your standards or meet the font you want. So you don't be fooled by the color. If it is blue or has a font that you don't like, that can be changed, and you can create a template that meets, for example, ABA standard and accessible as well. So it is easy to use. I highly recommend learning about these kind of tools. If you are presenting using a picture, make sure that you associate that with an alternative text. Colors has to be high contrast. Do not also use color as the only way of presenting your data. For example, questions that are red are mandatory. Well, I cannot see red. I'm probably color blind or low vision or maybe blind. I cannot see red. So colors should not be used as the only way of presenting data. Instead, use other ways of presenting. For example, like the example I gave, you can say explicitly and clearly mandatory next to the question. So question that has a mandatory or an asterisk are mandatory, and so forth. If you are presenting using videos in your education or your classes, make sure that it is captioned. Caption is a great example of accessibility because it will benefit not only people who are hard of hearing or deaf, it will also benefit everyone in the audience. You can read the captions in crowded areas. People who have English as second language will be able to read and see what's written and even learn English. So this is accessibility requirement. If you are presenting using an audio file, make sure to associate that audio with a transcript. And I believe with that, we come to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. And now I'm open for question and answer part. Let's see.
Thank you, Khalil. We actually do have one more question that came in. The question is, what are some common misconceptions about accessibility and accommodations?
So misconception, okay. For example, making document accessible. Most of the Office of Disability Services has like a division or a section where they can convert boxes to audio or braille or accessible form. All right. So people or instructors think that that's it. I don't have to make my document accessible because at the end, this office will do the job. And that is wrong. The office actually is trying to cover a gap in accessibility in the environment. All right. So by providing this office, and they are working only with those who come in and request the accommodation. All right. But there are others who do not even register in the Office of Disability Service. They try to rely on themselves. They depend on the accessibility that you should provide as an instructor. So this is the misconception that, okay, do I have to select styles to make my text heading level 1 and heading level 2? They will ignore it, okay, and rely on the Office of Disability Services to make that happen. But it is part of your duty because you are teaching, you are conveying information to all your students, including people with disabilities. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that, Khalil. We have a few more minutes remaining. If anyone else has any additional, here comes a question. Wonderful. So do the different campuses of the UNC system share best practices? WRT, I do not know what that abbreviation is. I probably am too old to know what that is. With regard to, I got it. With regard to their offices of Disability Resources Center to leverage what works. So does the UNC system campuses, do they have one set of best practices or are there diverse best practices across the system with regard to Disability Resources Centers?
Well, there's accessibility groups and community. We meet sometimes on a monthly basis where we discuss many of the accessibility issues that come across us. There is also in the level of disability services ahead, and they do conferences where they meet and discuss legal requirements and talk specifically about accommodations. So yes, there is meetings and groups that always discuss all of these accessibility and accommodations and everything that involves. I don't have a specific source that I can refer to you, but most universities, especially NC State, it is a great source where you can go and see many of the hints and tips. Here at UNC Charlotte, we are still working in developing, we have some videos that we will be publishing about accessibilities that we cover. We do internally a lot of workshops, and I know other universities does that as well, but at least I know about my university. So it is easy to search. One of the great sources that I rely on is WebAIM. Let me type that in the chatting. Where is that? WebAIM.com is a great source where you can go and see accessible hints and see the fonts that you should select. For example, it will talk about color. It has tools, for example, like color contrast, verification, or even checking the websites. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for publishing that. So it is webaim.org organization. Yeah, so this is one of the sources. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Any more questions? If not, tell me.